If you read Maclean's magazine recently, you may have noted that high on their Power 2021 list was somebody that many of us didn't know at this time last year, but who we all certainly know now because he's provided important leadership at a time when it was most needed. Wes Hall is the founder of Kingsdale Advisors, a company that's contributed to the success of Canada's most important businesses. Having come from humble beginnings in Jamaica, Wes has demonstrated the contribution that immigrants to Canada from throughout the world continue to make to this country. He not only has been a great success in the business world, but he's a track record of putting back into the community, including serving as a board member of the Sick Kids Foundation, Pathways to Education, and the Toronto International Film Festival. Perhaps his greatest contribution, however, is as he was the founder and chairman of the Canadian Council of Business Leaders Against Anti-Black Systemic Racism and the BlackNorth Initiative. He's been committed to the removal of anti-Black systemic barriers negatively affecting the lives of Black Canadians. He's someone who's determined to change Canada for the better. And given his track record, I'm betting he'll do just that. Wes, welcome to Canada 360.
Perrin, thank you very much. Thanks for having me.
As we look back on 2020, how has the pandemic exposed inequities in Canadian society? We've seen, for example, the impact of movements and organizations like Black Lives Matter, the BlackNorth Initiative, the federal government's introduction of legislation to implement the United Nations Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous Peoples in Canada. Can you speak to how you've processed these events and what it means for the business community as we move through 2021?
You know, last year was a crazy year. I was talking to Premier Ford yesterday, and he said to me, you know, if we didn't learn anything from 2020, it's really unfortunate for us all. Because in government, for example, he said, we've learned how much waste there was in the system before. We've learned how differently we treated our elderly with the long-term care issue that we're facing. We saw the inequities between races as a result. Blacks, Indigenous, and others were treated differently, and the impact that the pandemic had on those cultures. And we really saw how we interact as people in the workforce. You know, so as a result of all those different things, we've highlighted a lot of things. The pandemic highlighted a lot of things that we can either look to and say, well, I'm glad that we were able to see those things, but what are we going to do about them now that we've seen them? It's like almost like it's something once you see it, you can't unsee it. So when I look at, for example, the part that affected me the most, which is how we as Blacks are treated in North America and other places, we have to now look at to say, are we going to let the picture remain the same, or are we going to do something about it? Are we going to try to change the conversation? And forming the BlackNorth Initiative is really an attempt to change the conversation and to learn something from the pandemic.
We are in the midst still of the pandemic, and we're talking about how we recover from the pandemic. And often when we talk about it, we make the point that it's not just recovery, but inclusive recovery that we need to have. What does inclusive recovery mean to you?
You know, back a few months ago, I think it was October 30th, actually, the government of Canada sent out a press release, and they actually highlighted their immigration plan for Canada. And they set out the plan for 2021 to 2023, and it's noted the immigration level. And they indicated in that press release that that immigration plan that they put forward is the key to recovery, to the recovery from COVID. In fact, they indicated this. They said, the pandemic has highlighted the contribution of immigrants to the well-being of our communities and across all sectors of the economy. Our healthcare system relies on immigrants to keep Canadians safe and healthy. And they went on to say, you know, that by dealing with these things and by helping, and you know, it says it's gonna, as we look to the recovery, it says newcomers create jobs, not just by giving and starting businesses, but skills needed for Canadians to thrive and for us to have a better society. That's what they've indicated. And they said 1% of our population will be in immigrants. 411,000 in 2022, 421,000 in 2023. And they said 60% of those individuals are going to come from economic class, right? So we're saying that without immigration, we're going to have a problem recovering, right? But what really is the reality? The reality is, because they indicated that 60% will come from economic class, if I'm a lawyer in Jamaica and I come here, or if I'm a lawyer in India and I come here, I can't practice law in Canada. So here you are, you brought me here, I can't practice law. If I'm an engineer in India and I come to Canada, I cannot be an engineer in Canada. If I'm a doctor, I cannot be a doctor here, right? If I'm an executive for a financial institution and I come to Canada, I will not be an executive in a financial institution in Canada because they're going to say you have no Canadian experience. So there's a disconnect between us saying that we're going to use immigrants to help us to recover, and immigrants are mostly made up of people of color. And yet when they come here, they're driving taxis or they're not being utilized, right? And so it's equivalent to a team saying, I love basketball, and my favorite team, the Raptors, saying, I want a championship team. And they recruit all these people and they tell the public that we're going to have the best team in the NBA. And when they recruit all these talented people, they're staying on the bench and they're not playing them, right? So there's a disconnect between their actions and actually their words. And then, people start getting upset and they go, wait a minute here, we're still not winning. They go, how come those people are not playing? They put them in the game, but they go, you can't shoot the basketball. So I think that's the same thing with our economy right now, but we're bringing all these great talent in, but they're not in the game. They're not participating to help us win. So we think that there is a disconnect between what the government is doing and what corporates are doing. And we need to bridge that gap to make sure that they're both on the same page. So if we're going to bring, for example, in 2022, 411,000 immigrants to this country, who's going to hire them? Where are they going to work? Right? And are we making sure that we're working with businesses to make sure that when those 411,000 qualified, capable people come, they have a place to contribute and to help us to win?
Absolutely critical. And what's clear to me is that we're a wealthy society, but we're not so rich that we can afford to waste the talents of anybody who wants to help us build this country. So, and you've really demonstrated the contribution that can be made. You've also taken, in terms of the BlackNorth Initiative, you've taken a business approach toward it. We often are familiar with the expression that what gets measured gets managed. Yet we often hear about very high-level, lofty goals that people have that are aspirational. BlackNorth took a different approach, and perhaps a more realistic one, to looking at targets as part of the pledge. Can you speak to these targets and the underpinning rationale below them?
Yeah, people generally say, I don't like targets. And, but as business leaders, we all have targets, right? I met with my team, for example. I have a number of companies that I own, and we all set what our objectives are for 2021. That's our target. Each quarter, we're going to do X. And then we meet at the end of the quarter. And if we didn't do X, we're going to pivot and we're going to figure out why didn't we do X? And we're going to change. But we're not going to wait until the end of 2021 to figure out that we didn't hit our targets or our objectives. And as a result of that, we lost, right? We have to keep on measuring to make sure that we continue to adjust. So really these objectives that we set for companies to say, if you really believe that systemic racism is a problem, and you really believe that Blacks and Indigenous aren't really given an opportunity to participate and to help us win, then look at your own organization and determine if you're going to set immediate objectives to get these people in the game and to help them to participate, right? So those targets that we set are those objectives to say, we're going to make sure that a certain percentage of those people are represented in every aspect of our business. Senior management, the board level, and the pipeline. And we're going to give them a reasonable opportunity to contribute. We're not just going to bring them in an organization and say, now you're here, do it. We recognize the fact that in a lot of cases, in the history of the company, may never have had a Black person on our board. So what kind of interaction do we expect from that person who we've never had before? And how do we make sure that we integrate that person properly in the dynamics of our board and our company? And as part of BlackNorth as well, we're providing mentorship and guidance to people. If we've never had a Black or Indigenous person in the C-suite, again, how do we integrate those people within the organization to make sure that they're successful? So those targets that we set is to say, let's just look at our own business and make sure that our business is inclusive. And without setting targets, as you said, if what gets measured gets managed. And if we don't measure it, we just can't manage it.
Brings us to the final question. You've talked about the importance of targets and of having aggressive goals to be able to move ahead, the importance of getting started. But many business leaders are nervous. This is an area which they don't have experience and they feel uncomfortable about it. They're worried about doing something wrong. What advice do you have for business leaders who are wary or nervous or otherwise wondering about embarking on diversity and inclusion initiatives?
It's not this scary boogeyman around the corner. And I think once people start to realize that, listen, there's all kinds of studies that indicates that if you have a racially and gender diverse company, you're going to outperform, right? McKinsey did a study that if you have a racially diverse executive team, you're going to outperform your peer group by 36%. They indicated that every 10% more diverse your workforce is, you're going to see 1% increase in EBIT as a result. Studies after studies indicates that if you have people around the table thinking differently, that you're going to get a better outcome in the end. But what people fear is that, is it going to change the status quo? Yes, it is going to change the status quo, but it's going to make the status quo better, not worse, right? I've never had someone say, I've hired a diverse workforce and now my company is worse off for it. It's always better. But not only is it better on the bottom line, but interaction that people have, the understanding that they have among each other improves. And that understanding now that they have with each other, it now translates into understanding in their own neighborhoods and communities. Because all of a sudden, they see other people in their neighborhoods, community look like them that they've worked with, and they realize that there's nothing to fear, right? So if it starts with in the business community, if we don't change it in the business community, it's not going to change in society.
This is a conversation, Wes, that is just getting started, but it's one that's going to continue for a very long time. Thank you so much for being with us today, and thank you for the leadership that you've shown both within the business community and within the broader society to ensure that everyone has equal opportunity and that we're able to tap into the skills of everyone who wants to help us build a stronger Canada.
Perrin, it's my pleasure. Thanks for having me.